Christine, I would like to thank you for having this conversation with me. It's an honor having you. You're in Canada right now. That's another place that I can mark on my map. But it's because your book, Landscapes, got translated here in Belgium, and it's called Landschappen. And there are loads of viewers that know that title, so thanks to you. But first of all, I want to start with a question. Where did your passion for literature start? Was there a moment for you, or?
Um, it's first of all, thank you so much for having me
Pleasure.
here. It's really a pleasure to speak with you. I think it's hard to pinpoint a moment, but I've always loved reading when I was young. And when you're a teenager, you begin with the classics, and I wanted to study the romantics when I was a teenager because I fell in love with the Shelleys, Frankenstein.
Okay,
um,
yeah, the horror.
yeah, yeah, and kind of like the Gothic
Okay.
literature, and also the poetry of her husband Percy Shelley, and as well as other poets like John Keats. So that's what I went to school to study during my undergrad and graduate school. I specialize in the Romantics,
Hmm.
though it's been a long time since I've actually read the Romantics, so I kind of veered away from that. But I think a lot of the themes that I'm drawn to, and even the contemporary works I've drawn to, I can see a sort of lineage. Like, for example, the works of the German writer W.G. Sebald is extremely important to me. I mean, I reread his
Okay.
books pretty much at least one book of his every year, and
Uh-huh.
a lot of the themes of like ruination and impermanence, the romantics also address those themes. So I continue to be kind of drawn to the same ideas, even though they're by very different writers in the different eras.
Okay, yeah, and I also saw in another interview of you that you mentioned double V H Zebold. And can
Mhm.
you introduce us to that writer? What is so special about him?
I feel like he doesn't need introduction because he's such a kind of
I never
literary
read
giant.
something, yeah,
Oh,
from him.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, he's phenomenal. I mean, I think he's one of the most important European writers of the 20th and early 21st century. I guess maybe he passed away kind of right at the beginning of the 21st century. But I mean, I guess his most distinctive kind of stylistic trait is the mixing of narrative with nonfiction. And often his books almost become very essay like. And he uses a lot of images and artworks as
Mhm.
almost like a springboard for the characters to dive into their thoughts and their memories. So that was very much uh, a technique I tried to follow for landscapes at least. And when I first read his novel, I think Austerlitz was the first one I read, and it really changed what I understood about fiction and what fiction could do, and the way that it exceeds these boundaries of genre. So it's not just fiction, it's also nonfiction, it's also personal. So I think that the way that he did that so seamlessly was really, inspiring to me. Yeah.
Mhm. And that sounds a lot like the book you have written, like the different elements, like it's a novel, essays, it's a little bit of philosophy also.
Yeah.
And so there
Yeah.
are the things that you talk about, like nonfiction and stuff. There are loads of
Yeah.
elements from him that it's in your
Mhm.
work. So it's very interesting. Um, so you read a lot at a young age, but when did the writing came to you?
I would say fairly recently. I mean, as you know, did academic writing for a long time, and I suppose academic writing depends clarity and precision. Every
Mhm.
piece needs to have a clear argument and a clear conclusion, and there is not a lot of room for ambiguity and open-endedness. And I think that that's what first drew me to fiction writing, is because it allows room for that ambiguity, and I think for the reader also to contribute their own interpretations. So it's a completely different relationship, I think, that you have with a reader versus with an academic work, where I think that relationship is just, it's much more sort of about how you utilize a piece of academic research. So that was kind of why I was interested in it in the
Mm-hmm.
first place. And I wrote this particular novel over the span of about 6 to 7 years when I was working full time, and then at the beginning of the pandemic, I quit my job to to devote myself to the manuscript
Mm-hmm.
full time for a period of time. So that's when the novel was finished. So it's quite recent in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
were you also busy with the novel while you were studying like a Master of Philosophy, PhD in English Literature? Were you also busy at that time with?
No, so I only started writing fiction when I was working. So after I
Okay,
graduated.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh. And were
yeah.
you already writing at that time? Like you wrote also some stuff about different books you have read? Was it like
Um, I mean, just academically, but not
okay.
creatively. Yeah, yeah. So that's
Mhm.
all quite recent. Yeah.
Okay. I was curious. I saw that you studied in England, and
Mm.
landscapes is set in England. It's a very nice environment to set your story. You lived there several years, but in what ways did your time over there shape the atmosphere of the world your novel was in?
I think in terms of definitely the city streets. So there's a part in the book where the main character walks through London, and so
Hmm.
those parts are very rooted in my experience of living in the city and walking the streets. And I think also just going to these country estates, many of which are now hotels, where you go there for afternoon tea, where you go to look around, just the rooms to look at the artifacts. So I think just being aware of the history of that
Hmm.
architecture, um, all those ideas kind of fed into the book eventually. Yeah.
Okay, I absolutely love England. I never went to London. It's like a shame, I know, but
Oh,
I
yeah,
went to different places, but not London.
yeah,
And I remembered that there were like old places, like old
yeah.
architecture and very modern places. Like, is that also the places that you have seen in England and you developed your story from that on, or?
Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. I mean, I've always been fascinated with, I guess, the coexistence between really new and really old. And it
Mm-hmm.
is interesting that London is, I mean, it was a Roman, also a Roman fort. So it's actually quite ancient, and you do see these remnants of the Roman era kind of scattered in a certain region of London. And then, of course, you have all these kind of modern skyscrapers. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that juxtaposition of the past and the present is visually very striking, but also very useful as a metaphor in terms of like how people remember and how they relate to their personal past. Yeah.
Okay, very nice. It's time to really like dive into your novel, your debut novel, Landscapes. And I would like to say also that your cover and the version you created, it's very nice. Also, the Belgian version, I really
Yeah.
like the cover that's been
Yeah.
made with the great landscape on the
Mm.
background. But can you tell us where that spark was coming from to write this story?
Initially, I just uh, thought of a woman alone in a kind of ruinous house,
Mm-hmm.
and and then kind of ideas came in as I started doing reading, and a lot of images were very important. Um, and also in Zabel's novels, several his novels, he has these ruinous estates almost always in England as well, and he used them
Mm-hmm.
as symbols to, I think, in a way to discuss how power operates. Um, and so I thought of the ruinous country estate as the setting. So it's really the setting that came first, And actually, a friend of mine sent me these photographs actually by a Belgian photographer, or she's Belgian based, and she goes into these abandoned houses and castles all throughout Europe to photograph them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really very striking photos. I mean, despite the fact that these are, ruinous places, there's something quite poetic and sublime about what's been left behind. And so I think that the combination of the kind of the past glory and luxury of these spaces versus their present kind of state of dilapidation, I found that contrast really interesting. So I really started with the setting itself and the woman alone in the house, and everything else that came, the artworks, the narrative itself, the kind of ecological aspect, all of that came later. And yeah, and and I guess I just kind of kept adding to it as I went along. Yeah.
Okay. And like we talked about before, there is like it's a novel, there are essays in it, it's also some philosophy, and it's like it goes about the ecological state and the geopolitical state and stuff. It's not that easy, that stuff that you write about, but you write it very clearly. Was it directly your thing to write in that way? Like it's gonna be a novel with like my opinions about the economy and the ecological stuff and.
I think all of that kind of came gradually. I mean, certainly, I think because of the setting and because of the nature of the country state and its history, the idea of power and class
Mhm,
was there at the very beginning, and I wanted to address really the effects of capitalism and what land ownership does to people and also to the land itself. And so that was there at the very beginning, and then that then led me to think about what that does to the wider environment. And of course, while I was writing, that was when I think these issues to do with climate crisis were becoming more and more apparent. Heat domes, droughts, floods, in a way that was quite unprecedented. Like we've had heat waves here, and when I was
mhm,
growing up, never would Canada have heat waves. So
mhm,
it was. I was witnessing all this as I was thinking through these issues. So then it felt almost natural to bring in these problems. And I think at that time, there was also a lot of talk in the public discourse about how fiction has failed to address um, one of the greatest catastrophes of our age. I think that's now definitely been addressed. Like there are so many books that could be categorized as eco-fiction. So I think it's good that people are kind of talking about it. But certainly when I first started, it was not the case. Yeah, so I felt kind of compelled to bring in some of these ideas.
okay, yeah, that's very interesting. And also about the novel part that we were talking
Mm-hmm.
about, we follow the main character Penelope,
Mm-hmm.
and she's like archiving different stuff in a house.
Mm-hmm.
But can you tell us what drew you to that main character, Penelope? Why was she the point where you start to talk about those different stuff?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the archiving is crucial because I think the archiving says something about the the relationships people have with objects, not just objects in museums, but also sort of the objects in our personal collections. So I think she was really sort of uh, the portal through which I could explore some of those ideas. Um, and of course, there is a feminist angle to the book. And these were ideas I came across in my research. So there are
Mhm,
some very prominent feminist art historians like Linda Nochlin and Catherine McCormack in the UK, who've looked at representations of women throughout Western European art history. And it was very eye-opening to me to read this, because I'd seen a lot of these paintings or sculptures in person when I was traveling in Europe. And it never struck me what they were depicting.
Mhm.
I just saw them as, obviously masterpieces. I mean, Titian is incomparable. So I never questioned what they were depicting and how that would have related to the ways in which women were seen or continue to be seen. And so I wanted to explore that through the lens of a character who has been a victim of assault, and who knows personally what that is like and how she might react to these artworks. So all of that kind of came through the research process. I mean, that was not a part of
Loads of
the character.
different stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was not really a part of the character at the beginning. So that really, the research really helped me sort of add layers to her past and her personality. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. You incorporate a great many cultural elements like art, architecture, and all those kinds of stuff, but yet you place art at the center of loads of stuff. It also starts with someone who paints. Can you tell us why art is like the central element in loads of reflections you make with your Penelope?
Yeah, I mean, aside from the fact that I'm very drawn to the visual arts myself, and
Okay, there it's
yeah,
from.
yeah, and Turner, whose painting, of course, is on the cover of the book. He was a part of my PhD, so I researched about Turner, and so I've always wanted to continue writing about him in a different way. So Turner was kind of there at the beginning, and I think, yeah, I always start with some sort of visual image. There's this great quote from the Italian writer Italo Calvino, where he talks about
Mhm.
that there are two different kinds of um, creative processes. One begins with the verbal and ends with the visual, and the other begins with the visual and ends with its verbal representation.
Mhm.
And so for me, it's very much the second. It's like I begin with some sort of visual material, whether it's the image of the woman in the house or it's a painting, and then I kind of express it or extrapolate something from it into a narrative or an essay or whatever the piece might be. Um, yeah, and I think there are certain aspects of a particular art form that help me think about the form or the structure of a book. So for example, with landscapes, I was thinking about a landscape painting and the way in which you have a wider background and you have figures within the painting itself, and it functions very differently from a movie, for example. So I think that the way that each artwork is created and structured helps me think about how a fiction could also be structured differently from project to project. Yeah.
Okay, that's very nice, and I love that art element in your book. It's like also I also mentioned like it's like a diary because it starts like day one, day two, and then Penelope writes about different reflections on the art and the ecological state, and I read the book and I absolutely love that about it.
Oh,
There's
thank you.
also another influencer here in Belgium that absolutely loved your book, so it's very nice to hear you talk about how art influenced this book and how important it is for you. But following on from that, we talked about England, that is so important for the environment in this book. Was it like consciously that you were entering a conversation with the tradition of England and those old and modern elements?
Yes, I think in terms of the the history of the country house, yes, and a
Uh-huh.
lot of it, the history I learned as I was doing the research, and I didn't know about it all that much before, and Yeah, and I think aside from, of course, the influence from Sebald and his use of the country estate, I also looked a lot at, yeah, just the specific houses and, for example, their links to colonial history, and how that continues, I think, to play a role in English society. Because I think it was in 2021, the National Heritage, or sorry, the National Trust, they published a report about the colonial links of the properties, some of the properties that were in their care. And from what I read online, that report was not well received because
Okay.
people don't, yeah, it's still quite a sensitive subject, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously these are places people like to go for enjoyment, for pleasure. And it's the same with the artworks. You know, when you point out that actually this Titian is very problematic, some people think that's almost a form of sacrilege. But I actually think that sort of revision makes the artworks more interesting, because they were created in a very different time, but we are viewing them in our own time. And so by sort of viewing them differently, it doesn't, we're not dismissing them in any way. We're not saying that, you know, Titian is any less of a painter, of course not, but we are rereading history so that we might learn something from it. So I think that process is actually very insightful, and so reading about the country estate and all of these details about how they were built, um, you know, what they require, for example, like destroying the woodland, digging out lakes, all of those things that actually destroy the natural environment. Whereas in my mind, I always associated them with the
Mm-hmm.
natural world and with the English countryside, but that's almost a kind of like an illusion that was created. And I think that aspect of it was just really fascinating to me. And I think that there is something very that's very distinctive about the English country house in that sense.
Uh-huh. That was like one of my next questions, but you answered it already. Like
Yeah.
you find it fascinating, those answers that you find about some misperceptions maybe that you have. But apart from that, England that we talk about, the other research you did, was it also fascinating for you? Did you like that process of like searching stuff and putting it in your novel?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the research, aside from the Turner, all the other research were new to me, so it was not
Okay.
something I had read about before. So I was educating myself as I was writing the book as
Mhm.
well, and so all of that has been, you know, personally also very important for me to learn as someone who goes to art museums a lot, and who thinks about art, and also just to know that this is some, you know, that these um, new ways of looking at works from the past is something that academics are doing at the moment. So I like to kind
Mhm.
of, yeah, just be aware of the kind of research people are doing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that easy always to find information that is correct also. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's not that easy as a writer if you are looking for stuff. So did you have any conversations with people to know some answers, or was it all via internet and stuff like that?
Yeah. You mean about the art history?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like all the research you did.
Not really. I mean, most of it was from academic sources, or yeah, or from the internet.
You
Yeah,
know
so
the
I
source,
didn't.
right? From all the things you studied before.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So I just went to the database and found
Mhm.
you know, articles or books. So I didn't actually have conversations with people. I mean, when I first started, I guess I was quite anxious about showing anyone the work. So it was very much a solitary endeavor for most of it.
Okay, and why were you a bit anxious to release the book to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably quite common for writers, because you
Hmm.
never know, you know, what people are going to say, and obviously everybody has different opinions. And yeah, so I wanted to write the book that I wanted to write, and
Hmm.
you know, and just to kind of send it out and see how it does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and was it like a bit anxious about like just I give this book to other people, or like the information that you put in your book, if people have opinions on that, or this is not right, or was it more like that?
It was more about the writing itself rather than the
Mm-hmm.
information. I mean, obviously, if I had gotten any facts wrong, I would appreciate if someone pointed that out so that we could
Mm-hmm.
correct it. Yeah, but it's more about the fact that it's not a traditional sort of narrative. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, as you said, it's blending
Yeah.
all of these different things. There are a lot of interruptions to the story, but that was intentional. And of course, there are the essays, and there's also the perspective told from another character. So all of those are kind of non-traditional elements. So it was more those parts I was more anxious about sharing. Yeah.
Okay, I'm really liking this conversation, and I want to dive deeper and deeper to like I want to dive to the emotional core of this story, because
Mm-hmm.
beyond the novel setting, landscapes also explores memory, grief, and recovery alongside climate anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Which of those themes became the emotional core of the novel for you?
It's a great question. I think memory, the way in which someone remembers and how non-linear it is,
Mhm.
and the way in which um, you know memory kind of becomes folded into particular objects and spaces, and therefore come kind of these events and moments kind of come back in an unexpected way, and of course the way that in which memory and the human mind is not fully reliable, and we're very selective in what we remember, and I think overall memory probably is one of the great themes of all fiction, because it
Mhm.
remains something that fascinates writers and that fascinates readers, and perhaps confounds us in many ways, because our
Yeah.
own memories, as we know, can be very unreliable. So it's something that we're always, I think, drawn to exploring, and the way that we kind of revise, I think, our understanding of ourselves based on these unreliable memories, so that the self that appears on the page in a diary is in many ways a kind of fictional self. It's the self
Mhm.
that is presented, but it's not necessarily the self as it exists within, which in some ways is inaccessible, both to the person reading and also to the person who is writing the diary. So I felt like the diary as a form was also an interesting way to explore that, to show that the person who is struggling to remember, is a very unreliable narrator, and simply because memory is unreliable. Yeah.
Okay, and while we are talking about that diary, I want to know, do you still use a diary in your life, like to write things down, or not
Yeah.
like a diary, but a notebook where you write stuff down or stuff like that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do keep a notebook just for notes, or quotes from books I've read,
Uh-huh.
and I keep a record of things that occurred in a day, but I don't keep a diary in the traditional sense of
Okay.
writing down feelings. Yeah. I used to when I was younger, but
Okay, yeah, I think I read an article about those notebooks that it was really important to you, also
yes.
for your writing for this
Yeah.
novel, I think also. Uh,
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that, that in some ways, I wanted the novel itself to have the feeling of a notebook, which is, I mean, it's fragmentary, it's non-linear, it doesn't really follow some sort of plan. The difficulty is, of course, with a novel, there has to be some thread
mhm.
throughout to guide the reader. So it's more about balancing, right? Having on the one hand this sort of random provisional quality that you get in a real notebook, and on the other hand, the structure of a traditional novel. So kind of finding somewhere in between where you have both of those elements.
Okay, very nice. We talked about the emotional core before, and the emotional depth is matched by a prose style that reviewers have called elegant and precise. And I know you were a bit anxious about giving your book to the world, but there are loads of people that like it. They call it precise and elegant, but I'm curious, how would you define your writing process or writing style? How would you talk
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very grateful to all the reviewers and the readers who've been supportive. You know, it's been such a wonderful surprise in many ways,
Mhm,
and so you know, I really appreciate what people have said, and I suppose with landscapes because I think a lot of the concepts were kind of more complex, you know, combining all of these different elements, the ecology and the art, and as well as issues to do with class. So I wanted to keep the prose quite plain, um, in order to counterbalance, I guess, the complexity of the structure
mhm,
itself. Um, and so I do think about, I guess, the, the way that the two things kind of go together. Um,
mhm,
and that's to say that I don't think I would necessarily always write in that same style, because I think it's something that shifts slightly from project to project. Um, and in terms of my process, it would for this one for landscapes, it was actually quite haphazard, simply because I was working full time. So I would write, you know, on the weekends or you know during the summer break. So it was not something I worked on continuously, and therefore the fragmentariness in fact made that a bit easier.
mhm,
And you know I would add um, ideas or images I came across into the book kind of randomly. So I like that kind of randomness. Maybe it's similar to what the surrealists did, which is just kind of encounter things on the street and bring them into artwork. So it's a bit like that, where I just allow chance to
uh-huh.
enter into the process. So there's no blueprint really. I have a rough idea, you know, the single image at the beginning, and then these other things kind of come in, and I decide whether or not to weave them into the book.
And like the writing itself, the words that you use, the sentences that you create, was that a process for you, like to find a voice
Mhm.
for this book?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, that's I think that comes through rewriting and editing.
Hmm.
You know, just polishing and honing, so that you get the right voice at the end. Yeah.
Hmm. I'm also curious, like we talked about the things that you studied before. So there is also a lot of information in this book about the reflections we talked about before,
Mhm.
the ecological stuff, the art. But was it easy for you to keep those two things separate, like the information you give and the narrative, Penelope, the story, like the
Mhm.
emotional core of the story? How was it
Mhm.
for you to um how can I say it, like change those things
Mhm.
like in a nice pot where they
Mhm.
combine each other?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a challenge to
Hmm.
kind of balance, and I think it's tempting always to include more research, and to add and to embellish. So during the editing process, I had to kind of hold myself back and to not add to it, because I think
Delete the information too much.
yeah, and so I think it is a difficult balance, and it's interesting that some readers, say that they wanted more of the art history and information. Some people want less. So I think there's also a level of subjective taste.